Hello, everybody. Mr. Mack here. So glad you've come back. Tonight, we are going to read three chapters, chapters 22, 23, and 24. 22 and 23 are fairly short. 24 is a little bit longer, and it's a good one. They're all good chapters, but some chapters have a little more meat in them than others. When we left last, Violet Beauregard didn't listen. That kind of a kid. Snatched that gum right out of the drawer, began to chew it, experienced all those wonderful dinner items, the roast beef, and finally she got to the blueberry pie, and we know what happened. She turned into a gigantic blueberry. That's what she did. Mr. Wonka had to call the Oompa Loompas in. They had to roll her out. So Violet's out. Augustus Gloop is out. The Gloop parents, the Beauregard parents, they're out as well. And hopefully these two children learned a little bit of a lesson. You know, if you do something you're not supposed to do, or if you sneak or whatever, there are consequences to pay. Evidently, their parents certainly didn't give them any consequences, you know. But anyway, chapter 22 is called Along the Corridor. And I can't wait to get started. So here we go. Well, 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 sighed Mr. Willy Wonka. 2 naughty little children gone. 3 good little children left. I think we'd better get out of this room quickly before we lose anyone else. But Mr. Wonka, Charlie asked, will Violet Beauregard ever be all right again, or will she always be a blueberry? Oh, they'll dejuice her in no time flat, declared Mr. Wonka. They'll roll her into the dejuicing machine. She'll come out just as thin as a whistle. But will she be blue all over? Asked Charlie. No, she'll be purple, Mr. Wonka said. A fine, rich purple from head to toe. Oh, yes, but there you are. That's what comes from chewing disgusting gum all day long. Oi, if you think gum is so disgusting, Mike TV asked, then why do you make it here at this factory? Why you do it? Oh, I do wish you wouldn't mumble, said Mr. Wonka. I can't hear a word you're saying. Come on, off we go. Hurry up, follow me. We're going to the corridors again. And so saying, Mr. Wonka scuttled across the fat end of the inventing room and went out through a small door hidden behind a lot of pipes and stoves. The 3 remaining children, Veruca Salt, Mike TV, and Charlie Bucket, together with their 5 remaining grown-ups, followed after him. Charlie Bucket saw that they were now in one of those long pink corridors, with many other pink corridors leading out of it. Mr. Wonka was rushing along in front, turning left and turning right and turning left and turning right, and Grandpa Joe was saying, Charlie, keep a good hold of my hand. It would be terrible to get lost in here. Mr. Wonka was saying, no time for any more messing about. We'll never get anywhere at this rate we've been going. And on he rushed down the endless pink corridors with his black top hat perched on top of his head and his plum-colored velvet cottontails flying out behind him like a flag in the wind. They passed a door in the wall. No time to go in there, shouted Mr. Wonka. Press on, we must press on. They passed another door, then another, then another. There were doors about every 20 paces or so along the corridor now, and they all had something written on them, and strange clanking noises were coming from behind several of them, and delicious smells came wafting through the keyholes, and sometimes little jets of colored smoke and steam came out from the cracks underneath the doors. Grandpa Joe and Charlie were half running and half walking to keep up with Mr. Wonka, but they were able to read what it said on quite a few of the doors as they passed by. One of them said, eatable marshmallow pillows. Oh, marshmallow pillows are terrific, shouted Mr. Wonka, and he dashed by. There'll be a rage when I get them into the shops. No time to go in, though. No time at all. Lickable wallpaper for nurseries, another door said. Lovely stuff, lickable wallpaper, cried Mr. Wonka. It has pictures of fruits. It has bananas, apples, oranges, grapes, pineapple, strawberry, snozberries. Oi, snozberries, cried Mike TV. Don't interrupt, said Mr. Wonka. The wallpaper has pictures of all these fruits printed on it. And when you lick the pictures of a banana, it tastes like a banana. When you lick a strawberry, it tastes like a strawberry. And when you lick a snozberry, it tastes just like a snozberry. But what does a snozberry taste like? You're mumbling again, said Mr. Wonka. Speak louder next time, Mike TV. Come, we must go. Hurry up. Hot ice creams for cold days, it said on the next door. Oh, those are extremely well needed in winter, said Mr. Wonka, rushing on. Hot ice cream warms you up to no end in freezing weather. I also make ice cubes for putting in hot drinks. Hot ice cubes make hot drinks better. Cows that give chocolate milk, it said on the next door. Oh, my pretty cows, cried Mr. Wonka. How I love those cows. But why can't we see 'em? Mr. Veruca Salt said. Why do we just keep on rushing past them lovely rooms, Mr. Wonka? Oh, we don't have time to stop, called Mr. Wonka. Don't be so madly impatient, young lady. Fizzy lifting drinks, it said on the next door. Oh, those are fabulous, cried Mr. Wonka. They fill you with bubbles, and bubbles are full of a special kind of gas. And this gas is so terrifically lifting that it lifts you right off the ground, just like a balloon. And up, 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 up you go, until your head hits the ceiling. And there you stay. But how do you come back down again? Asked Charlie. Well, you do a burp, of course. Said Mr. Wonka. You do a great, big, long, rude burp. And up comes the gas, and down comes you. But don't do it outdoors. There's no knowing how high up you'll be carried if you do that. I gave some to an Oompa Loompa once in the backyard, and up he went. Up, and up he went, and disappeared out of sight. Oh, it was very sad indeed. Never saw him again. He should have burped, Charlie said. Of course he should have burped, said Mr. Wonka. I stood there shouting, burp, you silly ass, burp, or you'll never come down again. But he didn't, or he couldn't, or perhaps he wouldn't. I don't know which. Maybe he was just too polite. He must be on the moon by now. On to the next door. That one says square candies that look round. Oh, wait. I am so very proud of the square candies that look round. Let's take a peek, shall we? That's the end of chapter 22. So, they're moving. They're in motion. They're going down the corridor. This long corridor with other corridors. Corridors, just another word for a long hallway. And long as the eyes can see, the pink hallway. And all of these other hallways are shooting off of this. And every 20 paces, a pace is a step. Like when you're walking, that's a pace. So 20 paces, there's a door. And each door has words on it. And each door goes into a workroom where they're making the most amazing candy. And all of Willy Wonka's candies, they have qualities, they have abilities. You know, fizzy lifting drinks, they make you float. Hair candy makes you grow hair out of your face. So, lickable wallpaper. You put wallpaper up, it's decorative. You lick a fruit, it tastes like the fruit. This would be so awesome if this stuff existed. And you never know, someday it might. Anyway, chapter 23, square candies that look round. Everybody stopped and crowded to the door. The top half of the door was made of glass. Grandpa Joe lifted Charlie up so that he could get a better view. Looking in, Charlie saw a long table, and on the table were rows and rows of small, square-shaped candies. The candies looked very much like square sugar cubes, except that each of them had a funny little pink face painted on one side. At the end of the table, a number of Oompa Loompas were busily painting more faces on the candies. There you are, cried Mr. Wonka. Square candies that look round. Oi, they don't look round to me, cried Mike TV. They look square, said Veruca Salt. They look completely square, sir. But they are square, said Mr. Wonka. I never said they weren't. You said they were round, said Veruca Salt. I never said anything of the sort, said Mr. Wonka. I said they looked round. But they don't look round, said Veruca Salt. They look square. Here's what they look like. This is the candies, Mr. Wonka showing the candies. And they do. I mean, Veruca has a point. They do look square. They look round, said Mr. Wonka. They most certainly do not look round, said Veruca Salt. Veruca, darling, said Mrs. Salt, pay no attention to Mr. Wonka. He's lying to you. My dear old fish, said Mr. Wonka, go boil your head. How dare you speak to me that way? Shouted Mrs. Salt. Oh, do shut up, said Mr. Wonka. Now, what's this? And he took a key from his pocket, unlocked the door, and flung it open. And suddenly, at the sound of the door opening, all the rows and rows of square little candies looked quickly around to see who was coming in. The tiny faces actually turned toward the door and stared at Mr. Wonka. So, these were, in fact, square candies. But with the sound of a door opening up, all of those faces, all of those candies looked around. They looked around, so it was a play on words. They didn't look round. They physically looked around to see who's coming in. There you are, he cried triumphantly. They are looking round. There's no argument about it. They are square candies that look around. By golly, he's right, said Grandpa Joe. Come on, said Mr. Wonka, staring off down the corridor again. On and on we go. We mustn't dawdle. Butterscotch and butter gin, it said on the next door they passed. Now, that sounds a bit more interesting, said Mr. Salt, Veruca's father. Oh, it's glorious stuff, said Mr. Wonka. The Oompa Loompas all adore it. It makes them tiddly. Listen, you can hear them now, whooping it up in there. Shrieks of laughter and snatches of singing could be heard coming through the closed door. They're drunk as lords, said Mr. Wonka. They're drinking butterscotch and soda. They like that best of all, drinking butterscotch and soda. But a gin and tonic is also very popular. Follow me, please. Come, come. We mustn't really keep stopping like this. And then he turned left, and then he turned right. They came to a long flight of stairs. Mr. Wonka slid down the banisters. The three children did the same. I have to say I would do it too. Mrs. Salt and Mrs. TV, the only women left in the party, were getting very out of breath. Mrs. Salt was a larger woman with short legs and was blowing like a rhinoceros. This way, cried Mr. Wonka, turning left at the bottom of the stairs. Oh, please, go slower, said Mrs. Salt. Oh, it's impossible, said Mr. Wonka. We should never get there in time if I did. Get where? Said Veruca. Oh, never you mind, said Mr. Wonka. You just wait and see. Be patient. And that's the end of chapter 23. So, again, they are moving and shaking. We got to see the square candies that look round, and it wasn't really a joke. It's what it really did. Veruca and Mike TV, Veruca thought she was correct. I mean, she was, because the way it sounded, square candies that look round. She thought it meant, as probably we did when we first read the chapter, square candies that look round, the shapes. But the square was the shape, look round was the action. The faces on the candies looked around. That was spectacular. So, anyway, this is just part of the miracles that Willy Wonka creates with his candies. Chapter 24, the last chapter we're going to read for tonight, is called Veruca in the Nut Room. I wonder what that could mean. Don't know. Mr. Wonka rushed on down the corridor. The nut room, it said on the next door they came to. All right, said Mr. Wonka. Stop here for a moment and catch your breath and take a peek through the glass panel of this door. But don't go in. Whatever you do, don't go in the nut room. If you do go in, you'll disturb the squirrels. Everyone crowded round the door. Oh, look, Grandpa, look, said Charlie. Squirrels, said Veruca. Jeepers, said Mike TV. It was an amazing sight. 100 squirrels were seated upon high stools around a large table, and on the table there were mounds and mounds of walnuts, and the squirrels were all working away like mad, shelling the walnuts at tremendous speed. And here's the picture here. You see all the squirrels around the table. In the middle is the table, and of course these are the mounds of walnuts there. And the squirrels take a walnut and they shell it, and they just keep doing that and doing that and doing that. Awesome. It was an amazing sight. These squirrels were specifically trained for getting the nuts out of walnuts, Mr. Wonka explained. Why you squirrels? Why not use those Oompa Loompas over there? Because, said Mr. Wonka, because Oompa Loompas can't get walnuts out of the shells all in one piece. They always break them in two. Nobody except squirrels can get walnuts whole out of the nut, out of the shells, every time. It is extremely difficult, but in my factory I insist upon only whole walnuts. Therefore I have to have squirrels do the job. Aren't they wonderful? The way they get those nuts out, and see how they tap each nut with their little knuckles to be sure it's not a bad one. If it's bad, it makes a hollow sound, and they don't bother to open it. They just throw it down the garbage chute. There, look. What's that squirrel? Nearest to us. I think he's got a bad one now. They watched the squirrel as he tapped the walnut shell with his knuckles, and he listened to it. And he listened intently, and then suddenly he threw the net over his shoulder into a large hole on the floor, and that's what this is here. That's the garbage chute. It's where all the bad nuts go. Make sure I got the right page here. Hey, Mummy, shouted Veruca Salt suddenly. I've decided I want a squirrel. Get me one of those squirrels. Don't be silly, sweetheart, said Mrs. Salt. These all belong to Mr. Wonka. Oh, I don't care about that, said Veruca. I want one. And all I've got at home is 2 dogs and 4 cats and 6 bunny rabbits and 2 parakeets and 3 canaries and a green parrot and a turtle and a bowl full of goldfish and a cage of white mice and a silly old hamster. I want a squirrel. All right, my pet, Mrs. Salt said soothingly. Mummy will get you a squirrel just as soon as she possibly can. But I don't want any old squirrel, Mama, Veruca shouted. I want a trained one. At this point, Mr. Salt, Veruca's father, stepped forward. Very, 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 very well, Mr. Wonka, he said, importantly, taking out a wallet full of money. How much you want for one of those crazy squirrels? Go ahead, name your price. They're not for sale. She can't have one, Mr. Wonka said. Who says I can't have one? Veruca said. I'm going to grab me one this very minute. Don't! Screamed Mr. Wonka. Quickly, but it was too late. The girl had already thrown open the door and rushed in. The moment she entered the room, 100 squirrels stopped what they were doing and turned their heads and stared at her with little black, beady squirrel eyes. Veruca stopped also and stared back at them. Then her gaze fell upon a pretty little squirrel sitting nearest to her at the end of the table. The squirrel was holding a walnut in its paws. "All right," Veruca said, "I'll have you." And she reached out her hand to grab the squirrel, but just as she did so, in that first split second when her hand started to go forward, there was a sudden flash of movement in the room, like a flash of brown lightning, and every single one of those squirrels around the table took a flying leap towards her and landed on her body. Imagine 100 squirrels landing on you all at once. 25 of them caught hold of her right arm and pinned it down. The other 25 caught hold of her left arm and pinned it down. 25 caught hold of her right leg and anchored it to the ground. 24 caught hold of her leg and anchored it to the ground. And the one remaining squirrel, obviously the leader of the group, climbed up on her shoulder, started tapping on the girl's wretched head with its knuckles. "Save her! Save her!" screamed Mrs. Salt. "Veruca, come back! What are they doing to her?" "They're testing to see if she's a bad nut," said Mr. Wonka. "Just watch." Veruca struggled furiously. Squirrels held her tight and she couldn't move. The squirrels on her shoulder went tap, tap, tapping. The squirrel on her shoulder was tap, tap, tapping on the side of her head with his little knuckles. And all at once, the squirrels pulled Veruca to the ground and started carrying her across the floor. "Oh, my goodness, she is a bad nut after all," said Mr. Wonka. "Her head must have sounded quite hollow." Veruca kicked and screamed, but it was no use. The tiny, strong paws held her tightly, and she couldn't escape. "Oh, where are they taking her?" shrieked Mrs. Salt. "Well, she's going where all the other bad nuts go," said Mr. Willy Wonka. "Down the garbage chute." "By golly, she is going down that chute," said Mr. Salt, staring through the glass door at his daughter. "Then go and save her." "Too late," said Mr. Wonka. "Look, she's gone down the chute." And indeed she had. "But where?" shrieked Mrs. Salt, flapping her arms. What happened to the bad nuts? What happens when they go down the chute? Where they go?" That particular chute," Mr. Wonka told her, "runs directly into the great big garbage pipe, which carries away all the rubbish from every part of the factory, all the floor sweepings and potato peelings, and rotten cabbages and fish heads and, stuff like that." "Hey, who eats fish heads and cabbages and potatoes in this factory? Those little Oompa-Loompas only eat the cacao beans. I'd like to know who eats all that stuff," Mike TV asked. "Well, I do, of course," answered Mr. Wonka. "You don't think I live on cacao beans, do you?" But, shrieked Mrs. Salt, "where does that great pipe go to? Where's the end?" "Why, to the furnace, dear lady, of course. Just be calm. It's only the incinerator." Mrs. Salt opened her huge red mouth and started to scream. "Ah!" "Oh, don't worry," said Mr. Wonka. "There's always a chance that they've decided not to light it today." "A chance?" yelled Mrs. Salt. "My darling Veruca, she'll be sizzling like a sausage." "Quite right, my dear," said Mr. Wonka. Mr. Salt said, "Now, see here, Mr. Wonka. I think you've gone just a shade too far this time. I do indeed believe this. I think you went just too far. I know my daughter may be a bit of a frump. I don't mind admitting that, but that doesn't mean you can roast her to a crisp. I'll have you know I'm extremely cross about this. I am. I'm extremely cross." "Oh, don't be cross, my dear sir," said Mr. Wonka. "I expect she'll turn up again sooner or later. She may not even have gone all the way down. She may just be stuck in the chute just below the entrance hole. If that's the case, all you'll have to do is reach in and pull her out again." Hearing this, both Mr. and Mrs. Salt dashed into the nut room and ran over to the hole in the floor and peered in. "Veruca!" shouted Mrs. Salt. "Are you down there, sweetie?" There was no answer. Mrs. Salt bent further toward to get closer and closer. Look! She was now kneeling right on the edge of the hole with her head down and her enormous behind sticking up in the air like a giant mushroom. It was a dangerous position to be in. It's kind of like Augustus Gloop doing that on the bank, and finally he leaned over too far, and what happened? He fell in. She's going to lean over too far, and what's going to happen? She needed only one tiny little push, one gentle little nudge in the right place, and that is exactly what the squirrels gave her. She didn't fall in like Augustus did because of balance. She fell in because the squirrels pushed her in. Over she toppled into the hole head first, screeching like a parrot. "Ah!" "Oh, good gracious me," said Mr. Salt as he watched this. Watched his wife go tumbling down the hole. "What a lot of garbage there is going to be today." Oh, and he saw her disappearing into the darkness. "Oh, what's it down there like? What's it like down there, Angina? Can you hear me?" he called out, and he leaned further forward. We know where this is going, right? He's at the hole, leaning further into the hole, too. The squirrels rushed up behind. "Help!" he shouted. And, of course, he fell down the hole, too. But he was already toppling forward down the chute, and he went just as his wife had done before him and his daughter. "Oh, dear," cried Charlie, who was watching with the others through the door. "What on earth's going to happen to them now?" "Oh, I expect someone will catch them at the bottom of the chute," said Mr. Wonka. "But what about the great fiery incinerator?" asked Charlie. "Oh, well, they only light it every other day," said Mr. Wonka. "Perhaps it's one of the days when they let it go out. You never know. They might be lucky." "Shh," said Grandpa Joe. "Listen, here comes another song." From far away down the corridor came the beating of drums. Then the singing began. And, of course, we know who's singing, the Oompa Loompas. But before we listen to the Oompa Loompa song, here is Veruca being, if you can make that out, look real close, you can see the squirrels. She's leaning in. They're pushing her down in the chute. She was a bad egg. She was. Mom and Dad were bad eggs, too. And there's Mama being pushed by the two squirrels, falling down in through the chute. And there's Daddy Salt, right there. "Angina, how is it down there?" And the squirrels, boop, pushed him, and he went right in, right after her. Awesome. They're all bad eggs. So, the Oompa Loompas begin their song. "Veruca Salt, the little brute, has just gone down the garbage chute, and as it was very rightly thought, that in case like this we ought to see the thing completely through, we've polished off her parents, too. Down goes Veruca down the drain, and here perhaps we should explain that she will meet, as she descends, a rather different set of friends. To those that she has left behind, these won't be nearly so refined. A fish head, for example, cut this morning from a halibut. Hello, good morning, how do you do? How nice to meet you, how are you? And then a little further down, a mass of others gather round, a bacon rind, some rancid lard, a loaf of bread gone stale and hard, a steak that nobody could chew, an oyster from an oyster stew, some liverwurst so old and gray, one smelled it from a mile away, a rotten nut, a reeky pear, a thing the cat left on the stair, ugh, and lots of other things as well, each with a rather horrid smell. These are Veruca's newfound friends that she will meet as she descends. And this is the price she has to pay for going so very, very astray. But now, my dears, we think you might be wondering, is it really right that every single bit of blame and all the scolding and the shame should fall upon Veruca Salt? Is she the only one at fault? For though she's spoiled, and dreadfully so, a girl can't spoil herself, you know. Who spoiled her then? Ah, who indeed? Who pandered to her every need? Who turned her into such a brat? Who are the culprits? Who did that? Alas, you needn't look so far to find out who these sinners are. They are, and this is very sad, her loving parents, Mom and Dad. And that is why we're glad they fell into the garbage chute as well. Boom. And that's the end of chapter 24. Awesome. So we're dwindling down with children. As the night goes on, I'm getting tongue-tied. We're dwindling down. We are now down to 2 kids. Augustus Gloop, gone. Violet Beauregard, gone. Veruca Salt, gone. And these 3 kids, their parents are gone too. So we have Mike TV left, his mom and dad, and we have Charlie and Grandpa Joe. And so, gosh, the adventure continues. And this book is only 30 chapters. We will read chapters 25 and 26. So we only have really 5 more chapters to go. So we're going to read 25 and 26 the next time. Come back. Take a lesson from these kids. Don't be an Augustus Gloop gluttonous and making yourself, your own needs more important than anything else. Don't sneak. Don't be like Violet Beauregard. Listen to what your parents tell you. Don't snatch things when people tell you not to do it. Don't do it. Like Violet, she snatched that gum even though she knew she wasn't allowed to. And she did in front of everybody. And Veruca Salt. Don't be that way, where everything you want, and when you don't get what you want, you pitch a little fit. Don't do that. Don't be spoiled. We can learn lessons from these children. And anyway, don't do that. You don't want to turn into a giant blueberry. You don't want to be attacked by a bunch of squirrels and pushed down a garbage chute. And you certainly don't want to fall into a chocolate river and be sucked up by a glass tube. You don't want to do that. Take care. When you go out, mask up. Keep your hands away from your eyes, nose, and mouth. Come back for the next chapters. Take care. And again, thanks for joining.